Hey folks, it's Fernando doing our video for More Survivalist, and this is going to be a little bit of a longer video going a bit more into what's life like after an economic collapse. I've often said that it's not, things don't really unfold as it's often portrayed, especially in TV, where they just throw those concepts like disaster preparedness for a post-economic collapse scenario, and they bring up all these fantasy things where people live up their wet dreams of bugging out to the woods, living off the land, fighting off the zombies, and cities look like something out of Mad Max. It's really not like that. At least in the case of what I saw in Argentina, it's definitely not like that. I can tell you that much. It's not like that in many of the other cases that I've studied. It's not just what I've seen myself in Argentina, it's what I've been learning after years of dedicating myself to this, talking with people that have gone through similar things in other countries, in other parts of the world. So I've explained many times that it's not as it's often portrayed in the media. It's not what they show you on Discovery Channel, in this reality TV by survival experts. Really not much experts if they haven't bothered to look into what it's really like. But at the end of the day, what is it like then? What is it like to live in a post-economic collapse society? Well, the short answer is it's the same as what you already know, just worse. All right, it's the same as the world that you already know right now, but everything that could possibly go wrong, everything that could possibly be worse than it already is all right, that's the very short version of it. Could we possibly say that there's something good that comes out of it? Could we say that, well, but it brings people together? No. Completely honest here, there's really nothing good that comes out of an economic collapse, out of a country that falls apart socially, politically, culturally as well. There's really nothing good that comes out of that. You could be extremely positive and try to make the best out of it and say, okay, well, but yeah, it brings people together. Sure, we could say the same about a plane crash. If you survive, yeah, it brings you together. It brings the survivors together. If you are in a stranded island with your family for 5 years, does it bring all of you together? Probably, yeah. Do you learn to appreciate little things? If you go through a tough disease, do you learn to appreciate things in life more? Yeah, but would you say that there's something good that came out of that? You would have to be extremely positive in the way you think about everything. And even though you could see the glass half full, it's nothing that you would wish upon anyone to go through an economic collapse, all right? So since we're trying to look at how it is like to live that way, let's cover different aspects of it. First of all, the economic, financial one. Economic collapse, your currency loses its value anywhere from 30, 40, 50%, 60%. In Argentina was 66%, give or take. The value lost in just a matter of days. The peso went from 1 peso to $1 to 1 peso to $3, $4, and pretty much melting in your pocket, in your savings account. At the same time, you were desperate so as to get your money out of the bank, buy whatever it is that you could possibly need before it was worth even less than it already was. But surprise, you go to the banks, they're not opening their doors anymore, and all of a sudden you're watching on the news that they're converting your accounts. If you had accounts in US dollars, they're converting those to pesos, even if though that was not what you originally had. If you showed up at the bank with $1,000, $1,000 US dollars, you put it in your bank, they converted it for you to pesos at your loss. Sure, was it against the Constitution, basic right of people owning property and having a right to that property? Yeah, it didn't matter. Emergency decree or whatever, and they changed things. financially, what happened? Everything stopped. It was instant freezing of everything. The banks were not even opening the doors. Most stores were not taking or accepting credit cards anymore, so you were in a tough spot. You didn't have access to your bank account. You couldn't get your money out. You were limited to 250 pesos per week. That was all you could get out of the bank, no more than that. ATMs were running out of money everywhere. So it became a little weekly job to find an ATM with money and getting your allowance out of it. That was life for people for for a certain period of time. For a few months, you just try to find wherever it is that you could access some cash and buy whatever it is that you needed. Because especially at first, when stores, groceries, even the big chain grocery stores were not accepting debit or credit card. Later on, as time went by, they started accepting a debit card, which made things a little bit easier. But during a few weeks, a few months even, it was a tough spot to be in. So what's interesting is that there's no simple answer to anything regarding an economic collapse. Anyone that tries to portray things in a very simple light, they don't understand what it's like. It's not simple. At the same time that the currency is losing its value, cash is still pretty much important, because it's the only way in which you can buy stuff when they're not accepting your credit cards or your debit cards. At the same time, what is it that you would have done if you have been able to do so? Get the money out of the bank before it closed. Get the money out of the country entirely if you could have moved it off to an offshore account, if you had that possibility, if you had that crystal ball of knowing the future. But it's not a possibility. You just, hindsight, it's 2020, so you're just dealing with a hand that you were dealt. And in terms of financial transactions, in terms of house sales, all those sort of things, everything froze. Everything, you couldn't even buy stuff for running your company. Your suppliers were waiting so as to see what was happening. There was of course problems with supermarkets getting looted as people started getting more and more upset. At the same time that inflation was destroying everyone, unemployment was getting people pretty desperate. People were getting actually hungry, which is not a minor issue. When people are actually really hungry, they get pretty much desperate. And that's what you saw. Some people were taking advantage of the general chaos and lawlessness, but some people were honestly downright hungry because they couldn't afford food, they didn't have enough money to live, and they were desperate. So financially, a huge mess: inflation, unemployment, bank accounts frozen, default of the current of the national debt, devaluation of the currency, and prices just going up like crazy. That's what you were seeing in terms of the financial situation of the country. And this is something that started in December 2001. It went on, and it's still going on as of right now. Even 2014, and just a few months ago, another big devaluation of the currency. This is something that started in 2001, never really stopped. Many times I've read reports of, it took Argentina 4 or 5 years to recover. Bullshit. It's the same thing that has started back then. It's actually still the same government that started back then in 2002. It's the same Kirchner government that was there in the first place. So it's an ongoing process, an economic collapse, a full-blown economic collapse where everything falls apart, where the president resigns and runs away, and everything falls to pieces. It causes a kind of damage that does not disappear in just 4 or 5 years. It does not. It's damage that's going to be lasting for generations, for decades. You don't fix that kind of damage in 4 or 5, well, now 10 years and counting. and you're still seeing a loss of credibility, a loss of trust in the country, and unfortunately, politically, the damage that has been done, and it's continued to being done, we still haven't started the rebuilding process. We're still in the process of damaging the country even further. The second thing that it's key to understanding what it's like to live in a post-economic collapse society like it happened in Argentina is crime, which is the concern besides the financial aspect. Crime, those two, I've mentioned that many times, those two are the concerns that every Argentine has had in his mind for the last decade or so. It's inflation, it's the problem of the devaluation of the currency and inflation killing you, and at the same time crime literally killing you on the streets. Crime was something that caught pretty much all of us by surprise. I think it was already a bit of an issue, but it wasn't really as bad as it was afterwards. Before 2001, there was crime like pretty much everywhere else in Latin America, but it wasn't as bad as maybe Colombia or Bolivia or some of our neighboring countries. It was a problem, but you would see houses that had an alarm system. You would see houses that had fences. Yeah, you saw many of those. You saw some houses that had burglar bars in their windows. But right after the economic collapse, just a few months later, you saw crime get much worse. Why is this? I think that it's pretty complex. The financial situation was definitely not helping. Unemployment was definitely not helping. At the same time, the chaos of December 20, 2001 opened the eyes of a lot of people regarding chaos and anarchy. It was very clear that during those days, people got away with lots of things. People got away with looting. People got away with killing folks on the street. Over 30 dead. Hard to say exactly how many people died because it was no one was paying that much attention. But I think that was a period of time in which a large sector of the society realized, man, chaos is possible, anarchy is possible, and it's even possible to get away with it. So I think that after that, a lot of people that were considering committing crimes felt encouraged enough to do so. And it's huge ball rolling downhill that's still going down, and it's getting worse and worse each passing year. We've gotten to the point of being the country that has the worst robberies per capita in Latin America, according to United Nations figures. They actually have it here, so let me give you the exact number. By 2011, Argentina was the country with the most robberies in Latin America, with 973 robberies per 100 inhabitants. Mexico at the same time had 688, and Brazil had 572. So the country with the most amount of robberies per person in Latin America. That's not not an easy figure to digest, but it relates exactly to what I was experiencing back at that time. Folks, these are all things that I may have written about back then in 2011. I had written about those things before, but the cold data takes time so as to be processed and analyzed, especially when the country, the government itself of the country, the government of Argentina is not helping at all in putting this data together, because it's not in their best interest to show what's going on in the country. So it's usually going to be non-government organizations or international agencies or international organizations that are going to be acquiring that data on their own, and that's going to be taking a little bit more time. So today, 2014, almost starting 2015, we're getting an idea of what crime was like in Argentina in 2011, 2012. And yeah, big surprise, it was awfully bad. I mean, man, how did you went from living in a country where robberies did occur but were rare. Home invasions were even more rare. It was maybe once a year someone suffered a home invasion in your neighborhood, and it was a big thing, maybe once, twice a year. That was before 2011. Before 2001. After 2001, it was kidnappings that we had never seen before. It was kids getting kidnapped from the streets because of the school uniforms they were wearing. Private schools meant that your parents were paying every month $400 to $500, so you had at least that money. So they kidnapped you just for a school uniform. It got to the point where in the private schools they were telling kids not to use their uniform anymore because of their own safety. Now, I see kids walk around with their school uniform. It doesn't even cross people's mind that you could be in danger because a school uniform shows a certain financial status. But back then it was life. Now, today, how is the situation in Argentina so many years later? Worse than it was back then. You basically learn to live with eyes in the back of your head, and you basically have either two alternatives. Either you ignore what's going on, not ignore, but you simply have an acceptance of what the situation is regarding crime, and you just accept it as, yeah, I could get robbed, I could get mugged, I could even get shot on the streets of Buenos Aires. But what am I going to be doing about it? It's just like getting sick or getting hit by a car or getting hit by lightning. It could happen, but I'm not going to be letting that ruin my life. And even though that sounds a little bit like denial, or a lot like denial, it's what most people end up doing. The other option that you have, doing what I did, getting very much into security and self-defense, and taking all the passive, active security measures that you could possibly implement, being very careful about where you go, what you do, who you talk with, what you say, the information that gets out there, knowing as much as possible regarding self-defense, armed self-defense, and going down that path that, yeah, if you like it, like I do, like I enjoy shooting and love it, it's much easier for you to do that. But if it's not your thing, it's very easy to be stressed completely by it. And even if you do like it, it is very stressful. It's very stressful to live with eyes on the back of your head, always worrying about any suspicious activity, any suspicious people walking around you, any suspicious vehicle moving around you. This is in your head 24/7 all day long, even when you sleep. I mean, it's only now, almost 3 years later, I'm starting to live or think a little bit different from what I used to. You get used to living like with that pressure. It's like one of those deep sea fishes that are used to living with 100 bars of pressure or whatever, and all of a sudden you're brought to the surface, and it's not your natural habitat. You're used to a kind of pressure that in other places is not normal. Normal people don't live like that, but you did, and you live like that. Does it affect you? I think it does. I think it's impossible to live like that for the rest of your life and not suffer the consequences, at least in some way. Socially, in terms of life, it ended up being that you simply didn't know. Every person that you talked with had suffered some kind of crime incident in the last few years. In the last 5-10 years, at least once. Everyone you know has been mugged at least once. something stolen from them, cell phone snatched, purse snatched, people held at gunpoint, carjacked. I have a hard time thinking right now of someone that I know that hasn't been involved in something like that hasn't been mugged at gunpoint or hasn't had his car stolen at gunpoint. And you realize then that it's not normal, at least when you compare it to developed nations. It's not a normal way of living. But it is what it is. It's life in Argentina. The social instability. This is going to be a very long video. I'm probably going to be doing it in a couple of parts. Going to be doing part 1 or 2. In terms of social instability, those first weeks of rioting and looting that happened in December 2001, extending it to January in 2002 and such. We ended up seeing that happening sporadically every once in a while. Months later, you would see stores being looted. A supermarket, all of a sudden a mob would show up and loot the place, or at the very least demand food to be surrendered. But those first couple days that were more cars and stores were burned, and all those people died and such, and you saw the rioting in the streets across the entire country. Those were very visible, very graphic, but it eventually ended, right? All the interesting stuff to see. But it doesn't mean that the problem and the civil unrest stopped with it. Actually, it became part of normal life in Argentina. Strikes, roadblocks, protests on the streets. Man, it became part of life. Every single day you would wake up and catch a little bit of the news as to see if there was a protest being held somewhere. The mechanics was the following: any group, any union, any syndicate, any students, anyone or neighbors that wanted to protest because of crime in their neighborhood and no one was doing anything about it. Anyone that wanted to make a point in Argentina would bring a few tires, burn them in the middle of the road, cut the streets, cut the roads, block the roads, and therefore get a little bit of attention. And it became the standard procedure for anyone that wanted to make a complain about anything. The guys in the subway, the workers of the train workers, bus workers, taxi drivers, anyone that had a problem of any kind would put a roadblock and protest on the streets. That was something that happened pretty much on daily basis. Even now, there's always something going on. Hardly a week goes by without something happening like that, and it may be several different incidents at a time. I remember actually walking in 9 de Julio, like the main avenue, like the heart of Buenos Aires, where the obelisco is, like in the middle of the capital city, and you would see marches, coming by with their flags of protesting against the crime wave. You would see people with signs and flags and such, and then on the other side of the same avenue, you would see another crowd protesting about their land being taken away by the government or something like that in some province, or protesting about something completely different. So there were different incidents going on at different times. It's pretty chaotic way to live, especially when that doesn't seem to ever end. It's going on forever. There's always something, and years go by and you still see this stuff. Everyone that wants to complain about anything, well, just bring a few tires and burn them out there. Something interesting regarding life, especially right now, summer in Argentina is a time where power outages get the worst. It's 2-3 days a week you are spending it without power. several hours a week you're spending it without power at the very least. Worse in some places than others, but blackouts, power outages are part of living in Argentina, especially in summer when people start using a little bit more of the air conditionings. You learn to live with a flashlight. The EDC thing that we so often talk about, it's actually a necessity when you live like that, because power goes out all the time. Stores need generators to stay open, because if not, they cannot stay in business. They cannot use their fridges for their products. Any grocery store is going to be needing a generator. Any store that expects to have lights going, it's going to be needing a generator. Any house that expects to have power that is actually usable, because then again you have this gray area where you have electricity even when it's not being when it's not out. The electricity that you do have is of lower voltage than it actually needs to be. It's in Argentina it's 220 volts. Usually I would even see it go down to 100 and 170, 180. When it goes down like that with the appliances that require 220, your microwave is not going to be working. It doesn't work at all. At 170 it doesn't work. I've seen that myself. Air conditioning starts working very bad. You can burn pretty much any other appliance with dirty power. That's what low voltage electricity is usually called. You can pretty much damage anything electrical that you have working at that voltage. So best thing to do is do what I did, get a voltage elevator that levels the voltage to what it should actually be, and that allows you to use your appliances when you have electricity. And then of course if power goes out you don't have anything at all, but at least when you do have it, that makes it usable at the least. Why is it that this ended up happening? Lack of investment. The economic collapse meant that devaluation made everything brought from abroad very expensive. At the same time, politically speaking, they wanted to keep bills down, so the power was subsidized to a great degree. So incompetence, corruption, lack of investment, complete lack of investment for decades meant that the grid was simply falling apart. They end up spending 10,000 billion, $10,000 million importing power to the country, pretty much average each year. And there's no other way. There's not enough electricity being made. There's not enough gas in the country to keep the country going. So they have to import power from neighboring countries. If they had invested, things would have been different. So many things going on. You have transformers blowing up in summer because of the consumption and the grid not being capable to cope with it. You have people stealing the cables, the power cables. They cut those because of the copper in the cable, so they steal miles of cable, and that has to be replaced as well. With little money, it's just a matter of, it's impossible to keep it up. So that's why each year, it seems, every year, especially in summer, power outages become worse and worse. Sometimes in Buenos Aires, people go days, even weeks, without electricity, weeks at a time. When you go a week without electricity in the middle of Buenos Aires, what is it that you do? You block the roads, you start protesting, you start burning tires, and you start causing a huge mess until someone is bothering enough so as to do something about it. A mess and anarchy in the post-economic collapse society. Transportation is pretty much the same thing. Buses in awful shape, trains in awful shape. There's been several incidents, where trains crashed, failed to stop because they're in awful condition as well. The compressors that they have in terms of brakes, the trains, they're sometimes half of those are working. The employees tell their bosses that they need to be replaced, but they don't replace those so as to not spend the money. They don't have enough money to do so. Same thing for buses. How many times have buses being involved in traffic accidents because they're in bad shape, they're in bad condition. The bus drivers are working extra hours trying to compensate for the lack of income that they have. So it's all linked and intertwined, one thing with the other, making a huge mess. Right now, the ongoing problem is that the cell phones are not working very well anymore. Again, same thing, lack of investment, the government trying to take over some of the privately owned companies and using their grid, their network for their own purposes, for their own agendas. So the communications network starts failing and falling apart. I was reading the other day, 60% of the phone calls don't go through or have problems or fall in the middle of the call. So you have your latest smartphone, but there's no 3G, let alone 4G or LTE or anything like that. Problems of the kind that you are not used to seeing in civilized or developed places. And unfortunately, you know what? It wasn't always like that. Argentina in 1929 had the 4th largest GDP. It was a very rich, very prosperous nation. It wasn't not only just to 1929, but that kept on 1940, 1950. I've talked to people that were 60 years old, and they would tell me that when working in a factory, ordinary factory worker, with their first salary, with their first payment, they would go and buy a new car. A kind of life that no longer exists in Argentina, unfortunately. Guys, it's gonna be part 2 later on, but yeah, it's gonna be taking a little bit more time to get these videos through. Folks, if you want to learn more about what it's like to live in a post-economic collapse society and pretty much urban survival in general, my book, The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse, where I cover all these things that I already covered in this video, and I'm going to be covering in part 2 of this series. Guys, take care, have a great day, and as always, see you in our next video.